Hello everyone, and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James, and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please be sure to give this video a like, and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I am doing an individual movie review, this time for one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and I'm sure an anticipated movie for a lot of people, and that is Superman, directed by James Gunn, and essentially a movie that is setting out to be a reboot of the whole DC universe in the hands of now James Gunn as the runner of the DCU in general. So, if you know anything about the world of superheroes, you will know that for a very long time, Marvel has been at the forefront of leading the charge on successful comic book movies. They were that way for quite some time, up until I would say their biggest domination was up until 2019. Not that they necessarily have done bad post-2019, but they have definitely seen less success in those following years. I think part of that has to do with, just in general, the flow of how the movie systems work and how audiences respond to things. At the same time that Marvel was being very successful, we had the DC universe desperately trying to follow in their footsteps, but seeming to stumble a lot of times along the way. I was not a very big fan of Man of Steel. I found it to be a very poor interpretation of Superman. I did not like the darker take they had on him. It just didn't make particular sense for his character. I think the way they handled Jonathan Kent's death in the movie was incredibly silly, and the choice that Superman had to make near the end of the movie, a very key choice, just was one that left me not happy because it felt very contrived. It's no surprise that the DCU decided to just do a complete reboot. I think it was actually a pretty smart decision considering all the decisions that were made beforehand. And what's more, they got James Gunn on the helm, and I think James Gunn is a generally really good director. I do think that a lot of people seem to have soured on him in recent years, and maybe that's because of just the sheer amount of things that he's been involved in, and you can definitely tell a lot of times when a James Gunn movie is a James Gunn movie. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, although I generally say for the better. He does have a good penchant for making movies about a ragtag group of people coming together who have flaws, and they are able to come together to fight a greater evil, and they're able to overcome their flaws and accept each other as a sort of found family. That's what he did with Guardians of the Galaxy. That is also what he did with his Suicide Squad reboot, in my opinion. Very much so a different blueprint version of what he had done with Guardians. I wasn't sure how he was going to pursue his version of Superman. I was really hopeful that it wouldn't be like an ensemble effort or emphasizing on multiple characters at once, since it was supposed to be a Superman-focused movie. And what's more, I was genuinely wondering if this reboot of the DC universe would work or not at all. Especially because Superman, you need to do very specific things, I think, to make the superhero work, because he can be very uninteresting if you only focus on his godlike powers, which is what I think the DC universe in the past had made the mistake of doing. So what did we get from this new version of Superman? Well, let's talk about it. So, in this new Superman, they sort of decide to do what I would say the Spider-Man movies in the Marvel series had done in the NC universe, where they basically forego Superman's origin story, aside from doing a little bit of a text blurb at the beginning. Instead, they're starting him at about a couple months into his time of being Superman. He's been on the job for a little bit. The movie also starts by hooking us in with Superman having suffered his first loss, and it is against a very powerful creature that is operated by Lex Luthor, who is Superman's ultimate enemy in here, as he should be, and who is hellbent on basically just showing Superman to the world as someone who is dangerous and who should be killed. He wants to get Superman out of existence in whatever way he can. And as the movie progresses, we see that Lex Luthor will do anything he can to basically wipe Superman off the map, including some measures which are going to be seen as either incredibly petty or incredibly dark. Eventually, he does expose Superman, and he exposes him in a way that is actually, I think, a challenge to Superman and Clark himself, in that his origin story is not quite as wholesome as he had thought it was. His Kryptonian parents aren't the saints that he'd always thought they were, as a new recording reveals that they had decidedly darker intentions for Superman on Earth than he had originally envisioned. So yeah, there's definitely a lot going on in this movie, as is the case, I think, with a lot of James Gunn movies, a lot of different intersecting plot lines. But I think the main praise I have to give this movie is that even though there are definitely places where you can see James Gunn's markings as a director, I would actually say that he puts a lot of his flourishes a bit into the background here, and instead really lets Superman's story shine and really lets this movie be a very unique piece that is very different from a lot of the superhero movies that he's done in recent memory. And I generally think that is a good thing. I do think there are places where James Gunn's directorial sort of ideas that he typically does do pop up, and I'll talk about those in a little bit, because some of them are a little bit negative for what this movie is trying to do. But for the most part, the decisions he makes here are very positive. This movie is decidedly Superman's movie. I think it belongs to him very much so, and that is in part due to the great writing that really does hone in on this very personal conflict to Superman as he is dealing with his Kryptonian heritage. Also, I might as well go ahead and give huge praise to David Corenswet as Superman and Clark Kent. He is excellent in this role. I think James Gunn made a great decision with this actor. And he is definitely going for a more classic vision of Superman. He's definitely going for what people had been used to when the original Superman came out. It's very much so paying tribute to the old style of Superman in almost every way, shape, and form. Not only just the movie, but also giving a Saturday morning cartoon vibe in parts, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I like that they even make the decision for him not to curse outside of quoting what other people had said, but he never curses of his own volition or just off the cuff from something motivated just by him. Instead, he says, gosh, or what the hey, or things like that, and I think it's really fun how much they dedicate to that. And they don't make it something that's just, like, meant to be parody. It is very sincere. I think it also is just, goes without saying, that Superman feels like a superhero you want to look up to. He feels like someone who would inspire feelings of hope in the people around him. He cares for the common man. And we even see that in how he is as a regular everyday guy, Clark Kent. He is caring to those around him, especially his sort of newish girlfriend Lois Lane, who he's been going out with for 3 months now. And as I think would be in character for Superman, with how just wide-eyed and just passionate he is already in love with her and wants to tell her that he loves her. And yeah, he just generally cares for the people around him. I just love that aspect of the movie. Another easy highlight of the movie is the relationship between Superman and Lois Lane. This may be my favorite version of them, at least on screen. I am personally a little bit biased to Smallville and the relationship between Clark and Lois there, but I do think this is the best on-screen version that we've had of this romance. And that is because David Corenswet and Rachel Brosnahan just have such natural chemistry that you just automatically believe that they would already both be in love with each other, even if it does take Lois a little bit longer to open up. Their chemistry is palpable throughout. They just feel like the it superhero couple. And yeah, while we're at it, let's talk about Rachel Brosnahan as Lois. An excellent Lois Lane. Maybe my favorite Lois, even though I did say I like the relationship between Clark and Lois better in Smallville, I do think that she might have the best version of Lois that I've seen. I really like what she does with the character. She, I think, does just such an excellent job at combining the more snarky and focused reporter side of her, along with the side of her that she will only let certain people see, which is how deeply she cares for David Corenswet's Superman. In fact, I think she is sort of a perfect younger version of the Lois Lane that we see in the Superman and Lois TV show that ended just a couple years ago, which is another great interpretation of Lois Lane. I would say maybe my second favorite interpretation of Lois was in that TV show, where it was an older version of her. But this version just feels like a great younger version of her that, yeah, I just really appreciated throughout. Now we have to talk about Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. I mean, talk about just a superb villain performance. I get why so many people were immediately praising this, talking about it being an all-time great movie villain performance, and I have to say I don't necessarily disagree with them. This is an excellent interpretation of Lex Luthor. He is really just putting his all into this character, and I continue to be impressed by how this guy can disappear into different types of characters effortlessly. Last year in Nosferatu, he was playing a more timid and compassionate character who was in fear of vampires, and here he is playing just a big megalomaniac in the billionaire Lex Luthor who will do anything to kill Superman and feels emotional, visceral rage whenever that doesn't happen. Anytime that he is reacting to Superman escaping his grasp, you can just feel the visceral hatred there. It is so convincing. Now, where a little bit of Gunn's typical blueprints come in is that he does have a little bit of an ensemble thing going on here, although I won't say that it is as defined as Guardians of the Galaxy or Suicide Squad were, which I do think is generally for the best, although there's a couple places where that will be a problem, which I'll talk about in a second. But I do like the sort of starts of the Justice League here. We've got Mr. Terrific, and we've got Guy Gardner, aka one of the Green Lanterns, and we've also got Hawkgirl here too. And I think all of them are generally likable to a certain degree, although I won't say that any of them are incredibly standout, with the exception of Mr. Terrific. I did really like Mr. Terrific in this. I think this was a great interpretation of him. Nathan Fillion is surprisingly great as Guy Gardner, the Green Lantern. I liked what they did with him, although I think his arc was maybe a little bit too repetitive throughout the movie. Isabella Merced is fine as Hawkgirl, but I didn't really get to see much of her, and I would like to get to know a little bit more about her character besides her just being a very bloodthirsty killer. I think that's the one bit they have about her. But yeah, the Justice League is fine. They're not the focal point of this movie, but I do generally like what they're going for there. Now let's talk about the action and the visual style of this movie, both of which have positives and negatives to them in my opinion. On the positive side, I do like when the action is just feeling very just over the top and just very Superman styled is the way I could describe it. Everything feels very cartoonish and over the top, and I do think it works when it's doing that. And also I do appreciate that in this one, Superman is going out of his way to try to keep people out of harm. I do think that visually the movie has, once again, a sort of bright, cartoonish style. There are places where I do think that the very brightly lit scenes can become a bit overexposed. There are some scenes where it does have a purpose, like for an example, in an ending scene where the sun is shining very brightly behind Superman and overexposing him, but it was obviously meant to be symbolic. But then there's other places where I do feel it's a little bit distracting and a little bit too much. I do think the scenes where they're using more primarily CGI are a little obvious CGI. It doesn't look too practical, but I mean, once again, it is sort of playing into that Saturday morning cartoon vibe, so I sort of get that, so it's a little bit of a divide between those two things. I will say that the CGI was very impressive for Crypto the dog. I could not really tell that he was CGI at almost any moment. There was maybe one time where it seemed a little obvious, but for the most part, he looks like a real flesh and bone dog, and I thought that was very impressive. And obviously, Crypto was a big highlight of the movie. I just loved what they did with him. He was a very fun character. Let's talk about the Kents, Clark's parents, Jonathan and Martha. I really loved the portrayal of them here. It was actually very unique, I think. They especially did something very different with Jonathan Kent that I haven't really seen any other Superman movie do. Instead of making him sort of this wizened mentor for Clark, They do still make him a mentor figure, but in a very different way. Instead, he is portrayed as a much more caring and soft-hearted individual here who is very open and honest with Clark. Martha is also just so much fun, and I love that they play around with how both of these characters aren't that well-versed in technology. They don't use it as a slight against them or anything. It's just a fun little moment in the movie. And I just love the relationship that Clark has with the Kents. It's only for a couple minutes that they show them, but it's really all the information you need to see how much Clark cares for them. And I love that it's the scene where Lois fully accepts who Clark is and fully sees why he does the things he does. It's because of how his parents raised him. It's a great exercise of subtlety in the movie that I wish we had seen a couple more moments of like that in the movie. The whole part with the Kents was just excellent for all the exercises in subtlety and just letting the audience figure things out for itself that it did. Now, as far as other critiques for the movie go, like I said, I do think that some of the visuals are a little fakey looking. And also, I do think when the movie tries to become a bit of an ensemble effort, it isn't as interesting as it could be. There are definitely parts where they're emphasizing on the ensemble elements, especially when Lois is pairing up with the Justice League. And while I do get why those scenes were necessary because of how the plot needed to move forward, it did feel like it was taking away focus from the more important parts of the movie. While I do like Skylar Gizondo's performance as Jimmy Olsen, I do think that this is not a very interesting Jimmy Olsen. I didn't really see much interesting out of him, and I felt like the subplot they did with him was probably the least interesting in the movie, even if it did ultimately actually have the most key role to play in the movie. But this relationship he has with his ex, who is now Lex Luthor's girlfriend, and the on-again, off-again chemistry that they have, where Jimmy seems annoyed by her, but also seems to hold her at a distance, but then sort of seems to care about her. It seems like it's just sort of inconsequential and was something that I just wish the movie hadn't had, because it was something that I didn't particularly care for. But if those are the criticisms I have for this movie, then overall, I mean, it's just a very wildly positive experience with not much terrible to say about it. I think this is a pretty great movie. I really like what they did with Superman here. It feels like a big return to form, a return to what we've known Superman to be. Very much a follow-up to what they were doing in the Smallville TV show, in my opinion, which is still my favorite Superman content out there, even though there's not much of Superman himself technically in the movie. But it feels like a great continuation of that, and I am very excited to see what they do with this cast in the future. I think David Corenswet and Rachel Brosnahan have a lot of great potential as Clark and Lois, and I think if they continue to take advantage of what they have, we'll see some great things, along with Nicholas Hoult just playing an excellent Lex Luthor. I'm going to give this a strong 4 out of 5 stars. So yeah, that was my review of Superman. What were your thoughts on this movie? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you on the next video.